make 2 points. One point is the message getting through? But pedagogically, I think it's useful to think what the old broadcast model was and the new. So, you know, I talked about the rules, the new rules. You click and you talk, you know, no authentication, etc., you know, which gives it its kind of democratic, popular quality. But what about the old model? Where have we come from? Always good to ask this question. So when we think of radio and television and the early internet, here were the principal characteristics. We had a very limited selection of channels and media outlets to choose from. It was very limited. You watched three channels on French television before it became much more of the commercial stations came on. But you had a very limited choice. Now you can listen to anyone, anywhere, right? But that monopoly has disappeared. Secondly, to own a radio station or television, you had to have very large infrastructure for the creation and distribution of cultural products. You know, to make a program, what's your favorite American-French program? Like, I don't know if you're watching American serials like Lost or Glee or Breaking Bad or Sons of Anarchy. Fantastic.
On ne regarde pas de séries.
C'est pas vrai parce qu'on regarde, pas de télé, on regarde.
Non, il ne lise que Weber dans le texte.
Fantastico, fantastico. Anyway, I can't recommend. So, you know, these are very costly. You know, to see Mad Men, Madison Men, which is one program I like a lot, it costs about maybe $3 million an episode. Right? So you have, American television is capital intensive. Right? And which is, you know, this is the old model. And of course, it favors, the old model favors certain kinds of people. Right? But it had a mission civilisatrice. Because if you watch TV5, right, you had classical music. You didn't want to hear classical music. You want to hear long discussions about French grammar. You could watch that. Though he was very good. I used to watch that. This guy, he retired.
French guy?
Yeah, he said the test, the autograph. People, il était fabuleux. Je regardais avec ma frère, people au Canada. Très intéressant. But this might not be everyone's taste. It was an attempt to educate, you know, certain patriotism, nationalism, linguistic nationalism. You know, he had thousands of people in France, you know, trying the test against his panel. So there was a kind of, I don't mean it in a bad sense, elite, but it was a kind of mission civilisatrice. It was to educate people to higher standards. Of course, it was a world of couch potatoes because you could never interact, you could never generate anything yourself. You were just there, eating peanuts and drinking wine. Something like that. Whatever. I can go into more things. And significantly, it was local and national. Right? So that's the old model. Right? And there are some other things, but I simplified it. And of course, no, the other interesting thing about the old model was all the news was professionalized. There was no person, there was nothing from the street or from social movements or from people outside the cast, outside this specialized group of professionals who reported on the news. You had no, you know, people who were anti-poverty activists or anti-racist activists, they could never report the news because they were biased or they were not professional, or both. So our ideas about news has changed greatly. So what is the new broadcast model? First, unlimited selection. That's the first thing, right? You have access to any channel. It's not space spécifique. Il n'a pas une spécificité d'espace local. C'est absolument, tu peux choisir n'importe où et n'importe quoi. Cynique déjà, voilà. So, now I think what is interesting for us is that people can create and distribute content with a very small investment. So you can become, if you're a musician, you can set up your own thing. If you're a video artist, you can, it doesn't cost very much to rent a video or make a recording, or to have a blog, or to do whatever. So this whole notion that you can be a broadcaster is of course, part of being an interactive technology. This is quite different, right, if you think about it. You can be a broadcaster. And that's why Al Jazeera is quite interesting, because they're not allowed in Syria, but people in Syria can report to them. So that's interesting, right? On Skype, they show someone from Syria, right, all over it. This is the English-speaking world. One of my graduate students is a Palestinian. So she's part of the diaspora. So I'm trying to, we talk about Al Jazeera in Arabic, which is different. Of course, the audience is different. But it is significant that when you look at the numbers, which I had occasion to about a month ago, in between 2000 and 2005, the growth in mobile phones in the Middle East, in the Moyen-Orient, there was incredible growth, like 143%, 198%, 112%. So before the events in the Moyen-Orient, there was a huge explosion in cell phone growth. Now, you have to say, there's some linkage between this massive diffusion of cell phones and people learning to use it for what I call larger social goals. Now, it's quite, I was quite surprised. I don't know why I was even looking at this. Somehow I got onto it and I started looking at the numbers, and it shows a nice correlation. We like correlations. Right, so but you have to see this growth between 2000 and 2005 or 6. And then, of course, you have the events in 2011. So you have this huge diffusion of these new information technologies. Now, some of you will tell me about the digital divide, but I have to report that Africa, which is very slow in computerization, that they created they installed under the water cable a microfiber from, I'm not sure, anyway, maybe from wherever it's close or however it is, into Nairobi. So all of a sudden we see in Africa this ability, because when the British were occupiers of Africa, they never built infrastructure. See, their policies were different in India, where they created infrastructure for their own reasons, for security, for commercial reasons, whatever. But Africa has very poor infrastructure. So, of course, you cannot plug a computer into the wall in a country where there's barely electricity, or there's electricity 3 hours a day. So, I mean, there's a lot of problems. But with the mobile, it gives people the computer in a different form, like these mini computers to do different things, particularly around news, right? Because that's what people are interested in and contact. So what we see is this technological change that Brodel studied in the Mediterranean. And you know, his thesis is a very interesting one. He says that when states are trapped by rigidity and tradition, they cannot adapt to new circumstances. I'm simplifying Brodel. But this idea that when you're trapped, and you cannot respond to new circumstances, new forms, new social and cultural forms emerge. I like this thesis a lot. I'm a fan of Rodel. Even though you have heard his name, I'm sure you do not read it. This is the fate to be cited, but not to be read. Rodel is a fantastic guy on this. So, just to repeat, when societies are trapped by tradition, that is, modernity is tradition, not religion as tradition. Modernity, or neoliberalism, and rigidity, the inability to adapt, new political and social forms can appear at a time of system flushing. That is, we have this kind of deep crisis, and as we are in now financially, new forms can emerge. So, I think the social media, new social media, is an example of this insight. And it is the only resource we have for mass mobilization in modern society. This is quite a remarkable proposition, not to accept my word for it, but we should think about it if it is true. It's the only resource, the only means we have for mass mobilization today is the new social media, or are the new social media, to be grammatically correct. Right, so we have to think about it, because how do people mobilize? And this comes towards the end of what I say, and then you can ask me difficult questions. If I can answer them, I will. I think there are two things we have to think about. First of all, the breakdown in the left-right binary. Le déclin de le binaire gauche-droite. Now, I'm a 68er, so of course it's very difficult for me to accept that people would not make a commitment forever to one ideology. But this is quite an odd idea, because we thought we understood the world. We had class analysis in our back pockets, and I had long hair like my friend beside me. My hair was very long, it's out to here. But his is special. And so we thought this would define the world, so that you were on the left or the right. Now, what was special, I think, about this is that I'm not talking about the ideology so much, but I am talking about two things. One is the values, and the other was our relation to our parents. Because the binaire, gauche-droite, was based on the idea that there would be a transmission between generations of their political values. Even in rebellion, right? If your parents were on the right and you ended up on the left, it was an ideology that you adhered to because there was stability and continuity. But I think that this has ended for complex reasons. I don't think people make a religious commitment to an ideology in the majority. Right? People tend to be grouped in the center, somewhere in this very big center. And new social media is interesting because people respond by the issue. Right? So the nature of politics has changed because you say, this issue, anti-racism, I have a lot to say about that. I'm a feminist. I have a lot to say about violence against women. Anti-poverty. I have a lot to say. I'm for human rights. But when you look at these, do a discourse analysis, people don't say, I am a feminist. I am against violence against women because I have an ideology. They say it because the politics is personal, if you want to put it into some theoretical framework, or because people think that's the right thing to do to make a difference. Something that's not very clear, but it's about values. People end up having to have values, and values are complex because you can be, work in the private sector, you can have these values. You can work in the public sector, you can be a shit. So it's not because it's the means of production define you in some hegemonic sense. It's that people have evolved, and particularly when you're informed, you find that individualism and collective action are linked concretely through issues. People want to think about doing something, right? They don't want to just talk about it necessarily. So it's a more complex thing. So this breakdown of the left-right binary, except in politics. And even then, you say, what's left, what's right? Gee, it's a difficult question. Of course, I can give you a good analytical answer to what is left. Left, more state, right, less state, left, more taxes, right, less taxes, more redistribution on the left, no redistribution on the right, a type of, for the left, collective solidarity for the right, rights-based individualism. So you see, left and right does, even today, make sense. One of my favorite books that my students and I read together is Roberto Bobbio's book, What is Left, What is Right. Very good. You don't have to read the whole book. It's a very short book, but it's very stimulating. You know, so I always have, as part of my graduate work, I say, what is left, what is right, right? That is the binary useful anymore? So it provokes a lot of discussion. But the underlying reason is that people no longer have this continuity between generations of acting on your parents' belief. So social media accelerates this process. So it looks messy, right? People talking, debating, discussing, no leaders, etc. But eventually, this is only a transition to something else. But what that something else is, c'est pas clair. C'est une période de transition. On fait beaucoup d'expérimentation avec les médias sociaux, mais c'est pas clair où il va aboutir. Right? This is the big question mark. So this is why it's so interesting to try to follow this, all these complex developments. Okay, so the final thing is, what do we say is the message getting out? Or what's the message? Okay, so on this, I think the new social media does four things that we can discuss. First, it educates and empowers. People say, what's the point? Educate and empower. Right? If we think about feminism, right, it took about 5-6 decades, not counting the earlier part of the suffragettes. But, you know, modern feminism begins with contraception. 61 in the United States, 63 in Canada. France is very late. Very late. Well, exactly. But this is the beginning of a redefinition of women's rights in society and control over reproduction. Absolutely critical. It changes everything. It changes how you date. It changes sexual practice. It changes when you want to have children. It changes adoption. It changes many, many things. But it takes a very long time. So this empowering and education is essential to all social movements. If they want to succeed, they must empower people. To empower people is not passive. You don't wait and say, can I be empowered? Hello, I'm phoning you. Hello, are you there? I want empowerment. It doesn't work like that, as you know. People see themselves as being empowered, and they see that they're being denied what they call is access and control over their lives and recognition from the state for their needs. So that's the very interesting thing. All social movements, empowerment and education. Social media, very strong on this, because social justice and equality is back on the agenda. So that's the second point, is to add new issues to the public agenda. This is a very difficult thing to do. Very difficult. Because elites and society often are they don't want to add an issue. They don't want to say racism is an issue. They don't want to say that women earning 70% of men it's not a problem, or all these things. I mean, there's all rationalizations. It's too complex. Change is too difficult. Let's make little steps, etc. So getting issues on the agenda is very important if you expect to have any more kind of deeper, more structural kinds of change in society. Like, how do you get social justice back on the agenda? How do you get states to go beyond, to gradually, or not gradually, but to, send neoliberalism to the museum of ideas? See, that's our big hope. You should go have a snooze. Right? That might be your dream. I don't know. It might be your dream. But it might not be everyone's dream. But the point is, that's the big thing. Change the agenda by adding issues to it. So the third thing is to recruit new members. So you have to move from the margins to the mainstream. Somehow you have to move from the shadows, the cafes. You're no longer allowed to smoke. Any smokers here? Oh my God. Okay. 40 years ago, everyone smoked. Everyone smoked in the class. Right? In the classroom, including the professors. So it takes recruiting new members is yes, that's very important. You've got to recruit people to your cause. Did I say that already? Am I repeating myself? Am I repeating myself? No. So that's movement building, social media, propaganda, agitation, art, music, everything. Right? So that idea of people thinking about these alternative ideas, not simply as marginal ideas, but they become mainstream ideas which people accept. And the fourth thing is to find organizational forms, to develop new organizational forms for change that goes beyond electioneering, elections. Now, if we look at the first three, you can say, well, the Occupy Wall Street is quite remarkable on the education and empowerment. People no longer feel pissed on by neoliberalism. They feel that there is an alternative. Remember, in the legend of Tina, there is no alternative, right? The Thatcherism, there is no alternative to the right, etc. So you have to, in some way, change this hegemonic way of thinking. So I think the Occupy Wall Street, in the short term, has done a lot to say people now can see poverty and inequality is a major public issue. The second thing is, it might be on the agenda, but not much is happening. So it goes on the public agenda. People are attuned, sensitized, but what are the new policies? So we know that there is a deficit here, that this is the beginning. But it's chapter one of something else. Finally, I think it recruited a lot of people to this idea that market fundamentalism and the obscene wealth accumulation is a kind of in limbo, is kind of as a cloud over it. Like, people don't accept it as normal. Right? So, well, we don't know where this is going, right? Because it's fundamental to neoliberalism that there be such inequality. But people see that neoliberalism cannot deliver the goals it claims, which is a higher standard of living, a belief in global free trade, and jobs for all. And we know this is hilarious. This is the Groucho Marx making this kind of a claim, a different Marx. But we can see that there is a kind of a crisis, a hegemonic crisis about these ideas now. It's not clear. So we don't know where that's going. And finally, the organization thing is very strange. It's very novel, people taking power into their own hands. But what is the structure, organizational capacity to go to sustain this kind of politics of protest and dissent? And this is where the Occupy Wall Street seemed to be weak. Right? It worked to grab the attention of the media, to educate the public, but it's not clear that this movement itself will continue in the original form. So my final word is on this, who's on first? Qui occupe le premier rang de l'échelle? C'est Habermas ou Foucault? En fait, tous les deux ont une pied sur le premier rang. And it's not clear. It's clear for the moment that with social media, new social media, Habermas has the advantage. But, as always, surveillance continues. And the needle could swing the other way if we are not vigilant. Yes. Final word. C'est pas non. Vigilance avant tout. Et l'espoir